Why is HasanAbi reading Wiki? Doesn't he know all this? Why is he doing Wiki research? Why is Hasan doing research? Wiki researchers over here? Dude, please dial it back a little bit. Okay? I have quite literally brought up these numbers 1,000 times over the past fucking 2 months. You understand that, right? There's a difference between me saying Yasser Arafat won with 89% majority governing mandate 2 months ago, and then me pulling it up once again here right now. Just because you're seeing it for the fucking first time doesn't mean, oh my God, you recognize that you're a fucking buffoon because you're not in here all the time. And as soon as you are found to be wrong, you go, oh, then why open up the wiki? I do like GDF's videos, especially on this issue. He's been great. So let's take a look.
Again, one little note. The non-combatant population in the Gaza Strip is really a non-existent term because all of the Gazans have voted for the Hamas. And as we have seen on the 7th of October, most of the population in the Gaza Strip are Hamas.
Remember that the citizens of Gaza, these innocent civilians who so many people are shedding tears about, they voted for Hamas in the last election.
I would encourage the other side to not so lightly throw around the idea of innocent Palestinian civilians, as is frequently said. I don't think we would so lightly throw around the term innocent Nazi civilians during World War II. There are very few innocent Palestinian civilians.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
And I don't like how people tried to differentiate between the Palestinians and Hamas. They believe the same thing. The Palestinians hire Hamas to run their government. You poll them, they all love killing Jews. It's in their charter.
There was a meme that I tweeted comparing, I think it was like the Palestinian flag to the Nazi one, which should have been a Hamas flag. I agree that they're kind of separate people, although that's really...
The Palestinian flag? What? Oh. It should have been the Hamas flag?
I agree that they're kind of separate people, although that's really hard to say for the Gaza Strip. I don't know if that's true for Gaza.
In Gaza, who do not like Hamas, who are not part of Hamas.
Is that true? Because I thought...
I don't understand why... Oh, God. This is like... I don't understand why he takes this position when, like, it's not that hard to find evidence to contradict this statement. Like, every time I see clips of Destiny, it's always like very confident, but also confidently unsure. But because he's like channeling State Department propaganda, it oftentimes is just left unnoticed. Like, people don't look at it and go, wait, what do you mean? You're not really sure? Okay, well, how about you get sure? Like, you could look it up, right? And he always invokes plausible deniability so that people can turn around and go, yeah, well, he said he was not necessarily sure. And I don't really understand it. Like, there is a way that you can become sure. There is polling that is done consistently, right? You can do that. I don't know. I mean, this is like, I haven't kept up at all with what Destiny has said about this stuff, with the exception of like not knowing anything, demonstrably anything about Israel or Palestine, and immediately popping off with the pro-genocide sentiment and then working his way back to basically a two-state solution, as far as I understand, by reading a bunch of Wikipedia pages that gave him the self-assurance, while still simultaneously being lost on so many of the other very important, tangential, but albeit very important aspects of this conflict, like who the regional leaders are historically, and, you know, even in contemporary Turkish society and Syria and Israel. And for me, I feel like, yeah, he comes across very confident. He's very good. He's a skilled orator. He's very good at rhetoric. And he comes across very confident, but like, there's not really much going on behind that confidence as far as the information goes. His confidence has not been shaken. His confidence has not been shaken throughout this entire process. He's just the same level of confidence when he's talking about like how, yeah, there should be a genocide, I think, from the first day that he popped off all the way until I suspect now. And it shocks me in general. I think I have the exact opposite problem where I am grossly aware of the lack of knowledge that I have on a particular matter because there's so much. Always, there's so much more to learn. So I don't have that same level of confidence. And then I think that makes people think that I am oblivious to the reality or something, especially when someone that comes across more confident, that is a more skilled orator, can come in and just say, I'm right, and you're owned. Yeah, or stuff like this, like lacking knowledge about JDAMs and such. Like things of that nature are the only instances where people can be like, well, there was a clip of you saying this is definitely a JDAM. Like the audio signature looks like a JDAM, so that must be the only thing you've said about the matter and not the hundreds of hours of coverage at all. Or even the YouTube video. You could just watch that. You know? I guess the point of contention here is always, do you want to be led astray? There's a lot of comfort there. There's a lot of comfort there because the broad majority of the American public in the Western world is very Islamophobic. So you will find allies if you are comfortably reinforcing your implicit biases, right? Or you can, I don't know, cut through all of that and potentially develop a different understanding of why people do things that they do in the region.
My understanding is Hamas has enjoyed pretty widespread support in Gaza since 2006.
When approaching...
That's not true. Hamas has never reached a governing coalition, never reached the same majority popularity that Arafat enjoyed in the first elections ever held. Hamas squeezed out an electoral victory that America forced the Palestinians to have in 2005. I'm gonna fuck my 2006, and then on top of that. And then on top of that, the election itself was conducted where there were secular parties that were running against one another that split tickets. Hamas was the anti-corruption party against the CIA-backed secular parties for the most part that had at this point shown the Palestinian people that trying to negotiate with Israel and also operating as a part of the Israeli security apparatus was only leading to more expansions in the West Bank. So the people demanded a different alternative. And yet that different alternative was only, what, 3% more popular? 3%. The most popularity that any Palestinian leadership has ever enjoyed was under Arafat in the beginning stages of the negotiation process. That should tell you something very important about the mindset of the Palestinian population. Okay? Not only that, but also, when you look at exit polling on top of both the 2006 election and the many different polls conducted in the Palestinian population, you realize that the way people vote is not even necessarily aligned with what their interests and what their needs are. And there is no better example of this than the consistent popularity of an even two-state solution, in spite of the fact that Israel has shown that the two-state solution is simply a carrot to dangle in front of the Palestinian population as they continuously built settlements and expanded in the West Bank, denying the Palestinians their right to have a contiguous state that they deserve to have. 75 years after the Nakba, the weak and conspiratorial Arab role in the British mandate were mainly responsible for the Nakba, the split between the West Bank and Gaza Strip, not damaging development that has happened to the Palestinian people since the Nakba, followed by the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. When we look at Section 5, legislative and presidential elections, 69% want elections to take place, but 67% don't expect it to happen. In elections between President Abbas and Ismail Haniyeh, Haniyeh wins 56%, and Abbas gets 33%. Like I said, the only political entity that is less popular than Hamas for the Palestinians is literally the Palestinian Authority. It's Abbas. Why? The question to ask always is why? Okay? The answer is super understandable. It's because Israel has squashed deliberately any kind of conciliatory governmental body that the Palestinians have put together time and time again and used them as collaborators to show the Palestinian people that they are not interested in negotiations whatsoever and only interested in propping up more militant factions so they can thwart any kind of Palestinian nation-state project. Satisfaction with Abbas stands at 17% and 80% want him to resign. In parliamentary elections, Hamas receives 34% of the popular vote, and Fatah receives 31%. 31% say Hamas deserves to represent the Palestinian people, and 21% say Fatah, led by Abbas, deserves to do that. 46% believe that Hamas's victory in the student elections in Birzeit and An-Najah universities reflects the public attitudes of Palestinians in the West Bank. Hamas, surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, is also more popular in an area where they do not have any sort of civil governance. The West Bank. Hamas is more popular in the West Bank than it is in Gaza. Whose interest is served by the continued existence or the collapse of the PA? 43% say that Israel's punitive measures against the PA are aimed at weakening it and not pushing it to collapse. 63% say that Israel's interest lies in the continued existence of the PA, Palestinian Authority. Half of the public say that the interest of the Palestinian people lies in the dissolution or the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. Okay? I agree with your general claims about popularities of the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli authorities among Palestinians, but Hamas is very popular in Gaza. You can see mass people cheering them on in both Gaza and the West Bank, something you'll never see with the PA. Yes, because, and this is Benjamin Netanyahu's own personal admission, time and time again, both in closed-door meetings with other Likud members in 2019 or on television, as a matter of fact, that they can always, in any effort to thwart Palestinian statehood, has to happen by propping up Hamas as the only entity to bargain with, the only entity to negotiate with, because they control how high the flames go. Okay? Because everybody recognizes Hamas as a terrorist organization. Everybody recognizes Hamas as a terrorist organization. And ain't nobody is going to defend a terrorist organization in the international community, in the Western world especially. Okay? This is by design. Yes, they call it literally mowing the lawn. Every single siege that they've conducted in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has happened as a consequence of Hamas retaliating after saying that they are going to retaliate if the raids at the Al-Aqsa Mosque or Sheikh Jarrah continue, and the Israeli government continues to do so, and then Hamas says we're going to retaliate. They do retaliate by lobbing missiles. 90% of them are intercepted by, our taxpayer-funded Khmer interceptors. the Iron Dome, if you will. Okay? And then Israel uses that as an opportunity, go into the Gaza Strip and mow the lawn. Every single time they say, we are doing this to defeat Hamas. We are doing this to defeat Hamas. We have to destroy Hamas. We have to destroy Hamas. They never destroy Hamas. They just leave it. They never can destroy Hamas because ultimately Hamas is simply a mere expression of Palestinian resistance. It might not be the expression that you agree with. I certainly don't. But that is precisely what it is. And the Palestinian people see it as such. They're not like, oh, it's great. We love Hamas because we are anti-Semites. That's not how this works. They look at the situation in front of them. They realize that they have no other alternatives. And the one party that Israel is supposed to be propping up to show the Palestinian people like, hey, if you negotiate with us, we give you everything you want. You want a statehood? We give it to you. That's the Palestinian Authority. Look at what the Palestinian Authority does in the West Bank. Look at all the fucking continued expansion of settlements in the West Bank. Okay, and then the other party at least is like striking back, maybe even engaging in hostage negotiations after taking hostages. These are things that are impossible to avoid. If you're a Palestinian, you see it. And slowly but surely you say, look, I don't agree with everything that they're fucking doing, but at least they're fighting back against the infinitely more oppressive, genocidal, nation-state project that has destroyed my life, killed my family members, displaced me for years, refuses to recognize that I even exist as a human being, and will continue to do so with broad international support. That's it. And even then, when you look at these numbers, they still never get to the same level of popularity that Arafat had in the first Palestinian elections ever held, in the beginning of the negotiations process. What was it, 87%? 87%. That is the broadest governing mandate that you can ever get by internationally recognized elections that were held and were seen as fair and free, by the way. Arafat in the beginning of the negotiations process and Arafat at the end of the negotiations process, of course, two entirely different situations. So why couldn't he deliver the two-state? Because Israel was never interested in the two-state. And anyone that tries to tell you that Israel was always interested in maintaining a two-state is wrong. They're either misguided or they're lying. That was never an interest. That was never a real interest. One, how can you negotiate with someone when they have a knife to your neck is the real question. You're not negotiating on equal ground. That's not a negotiation. That's a hostage situation when you're held under coercive conditions. But even besides that, how can you assume that this is a serious negotiation, that the Israeli offerings were ever real when they continuously expanded in the West Bank throughout this entire process while dangling the two-state solution as a carrot? Many Israeli scholars at this point even recognize that a two-state solution has been absolutely eviscerated by the West Bank settlements. 750,000 Israeli Jews now live in the West Bank. 450,000 of them live in like straight up the West Bank in settlements and enclaves that have partitioned out Palestinian villages with a security apparatus that absolutely destroys their lives, makes it impossible to survive normally, makes a 10-minute trip, turns a 10-minute trip into a 10-hour process where you can even be arrested and humiliated with a checkpoint structure and a tyrannical permit regime. Okay? Palestinians see that. They recognize it. They recognize what's happening. It's impossible for them not to see. This has made a two-state solution impossible unless you are advocating for the forcible expulsion of, at the very least, 450,000 Israeli Jews living in the West Bank and their settlements. Okay? Which is not going to happen. That would never happen. In 2005, it became way too costly and unsustainable for the Israeli Jewish settlements to exist in the Gaza Strip. That's why they pulled out. The number of settlers in Gaza at the time was 8,000. And even then, the IDF had to go in and forcibly remove them. Okay? You cannot do that to 450,000 religious zealots, okay? Like absolute freaks. Can't do that. It's not going to happen. Anyway, let's continue with this.
History, it's easy and convenient to otherize, dehumanize, and reduce nations of millions of people into neat little categories. It doesn't take any effort or critical thinking. It also makes people feel good about themselves and the side they support in any war. An embarrassingly naive and asinine assertion that their side is intrinsically good and the other is intrinsically bad. To take the ultimate example, comparisons to Nazi Germany abound in the lead-up to conflicts. Take Iraq. In April 2003, shortly after the invasion, CNN's senior political analyst Bill Schneider wrote in The Atlantic, "The problem in Iraq is not just Saddam Hussein, it's an entire political structure. His Ba'ath Party must be destroyed." Iraq is a police state governed by a totalitarian party, much like Hitler's Nazi Party. Further, Hitler had the SS. Saddam has his Republican Guard. When Saddam and his henchmen are gone, the Ba'ath regime will crumble, just as the Nazi Party did after Hitler's suicide in the Berlin bunker. He also quotes then Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz. "It's almost like cutting off the head of the snake, and the rest of the body will go." Wolfowitz, an influential hawk who helped sway the Bush administration in favor of toppling Saddam, was obsessed with comparing Saddam to Hitler. This orientation toward Nazism would prove central to his thinking on Iraq. Again and again, he would describe Saddam Hussein and his security forces as the modern equivalent to the Gestapo. It was almost a verbal tic for him. Said Thomas Ricks in his book Fiasco, "If one was convinced that Saddam Hussein was the modern equivalent of Hitler, and his secret police the contemporary version of the Gestapo, then it was easy to see and portray anyone opposing his aggressive policies as the moral equivalent of Neville Chamberlain." So for years, Wolfowitz prodded the...
I love that this argument is identical every single time America puts the crosshairs upon a new foreign adversary. Always. You should be very careful when you hear this exact same narrative from those who consider themselves to be radical leftists. It is always the same. I mean, fucking Putin has done the same shit too. Yeah, everybody does it. Everybody says the same exact shit. Our enemy is Hitler. Our enemy is literally Hitler. Always. I mean, modern neo-Nazi equivalents would probably say the exact same thing. As close as you can get to literal Hitler, will turn around and go, no, our enemies are Hitler.
The American people toward war with Iraq. So we see that this comparison has parallels in history which have spurred dire consequences. Comparing a state or a people with Nazi Germany has a powerful and compelling effect on many people. It achieves the goal of dehumanizing an entire civilian population. This is done through a presupposition which most seem to take for granted. Germany was the Nazis, and Germans were Nazis. Fascinating and important work has actually been done on public opinion in Nazi Germany, not least of which being The Germans and the Final Solution, Public Opinion Under Nazism, by David Bankier, who led the Holocaust Research Institute at Yad Vashem, the official Israeli memorial to the Shoah. The study utilized Gestapo reports, as well as reports from district governors in Prussia and Bavaria, encompassing the majority of the German population. He also scoured SD reports, as in the Siegerheitsdienst, the Nazi spy agency, and underground publications from opposition parties. Bankier showed that, with an absence of freedom of expression,
Don't defend fucking Saddam, use chemical bombs on Iranians or Iraqis. Oh my God, dude. I don't think that there's a single fucking person that would say that Iraq is better off post-Saddam. Okay? Ironic, because you talk about the chemical bombs. Where did he get the chemical bombs is a question that you should ask yourself, by the way. Where did he get the chemical weapons from? I wonder. Okay? But secondly, you have to look at a situation not by how bad a party is, but by how much worse a situation will occur if you destabilize the nation, if you destabilize an entire region. I can't believe there are still people that fucking unironically, in a most cowardly way possible, defend the Iraq invasion that was unjustifiable by every metric, that pretty much even neocon warhawks of the time have openly admitted was a mistake and act like they didn't actually champion it in the most bloodthirsty ways possible. Okay? And we still have chatters in here that turn around and go, yeah, don't fucking defend Saddam. Use chemical bombs on Iranians and Iraqis. You don't have to defend Saddam.
Straight up, if you don't vote for Biden.
I'd have to disagree. As a Shia, I know a lot of Shia who think this. They think no matter how bad the situation is better than under the Saddam regime. Sure, I know. I know that there's Shia parties that agree with that. But that is not the broad majority opinion. And that is not the truth anyway. Okay? Because ultimately you run into the under no circumstances do you hand it to ISIS conundrum. Okay? Saddam was a menace. Glad we killed him. Okay? There's still people who champion this narrative. It's like, it's unshakable. It's simply an uneducated take. That's it. The justification was Saddam is bad, and therefore we can kill millions of Iraqis and plunder their natural resources, specifically oil extraction, and eviscerate an entire region and leave it permanently fucked. Ridiculous. And we had to literally lie to do so, by the way. We lied about WMDs that were not there to even go in and do that. So fucking crazy. It's my country, so I know its history. Two things can be true at the same time. Okay, it's your country. Are you in here? Bro, Iraq Shias, Iraqi Kurds literally fucking are the Iranian diaspora, but literally live in Iraq. You know what I mean? I don't know if this person lives in Iraq still. Probably not. Straight up, same mentality. It's just like, yes, please, my people yearn for freedom. You have to glass us. Sorry, man. Your country or not, you know, absolutely ridiculous perspective. Look at the situation. Look at your country. Is it better? Is it better off?
It was still important to understand the opinions of the general public in order to identify dissent. As a result, the Nazi security services conducted regular, secret reports on public opinion, called situation reports or reports on the public mood. Bankier demonstrates that the idea of a monolithic German society actually reflected the Nazi propaganda and its goal. It was 1932 when Hitler's Nazi Party came to dominate the Reichstag, although only by winning 37% of the national vote. And support only declined from there. From then on, in contrast to this idealized state of affairs, our sources revealed that from as early as summer 1934, the euphoria which had accompanied the party's rise and ascension to power was steadily on the wane. Indeed, he reports,
just because his words due to American imperialism doesn't justify portraying Saddam as some great and just leader. That's so sick that you said that, because this is the first time that that has ever been mentioned. I never said that. You did. I never said that. Those words never came out of my mouth. You have to say that, because otherwise your position is untenable. Stupid.
attitudes in Germany were characterized by growing distaste for political action, unwillingness to participate in mass mobilization campaigns, and reluctance to support Nazi rallies, parades, and meetings. Indeed, official propaganda was often met with passive hostility. The Dusseldorf Gestapo station reported about the indifferent and often apathetic disposition of broad sectors of the population. Following May Day festivities in 1935, the Münster Gestapo station reported, "The public mood has considerably deteriorated in recent weeks, particularly among the local workers." The notion that all Germans underwent a process of social atomization in the Third Reich is nearer to Nazi propaganda than to historical reality. For people like Brian Mast, history is uncomplicated, and his choice of wording is revealing.
I don't think we would so lightly throw around the term innocent Nazi civilians.
And of course, he's not alone in his sentiment. But as
You just admitted he used chemical weapons, but suggesting the question of where did he get them apparently means you love him. Yeah, I love when you know, foreign totalitarian leaders get their chemical weapons from us. They're engaging in commerce, and I think that's sick when they use them, and I think that they're very good. The similar principle exists for Gaddafi as well, okay? It's an identical principle because Israel is an extension or a mere expression of American foreign policy, okay? We always look at the situation as oftentimes a foreign entity, a foreign entity comes in and destabilizes or acts like they're going to fucking bring about democracy or whatever, like in Iraq or in Libya, destabilizes an entire country and then leaves it in fucking ruin and fucks off. I don't think anybody would say that Libya is better off post-Gaddafi or Iraq is better off post-Saddam. I mean, some people might, but they're wrong.
We can see for ourselves, Germany was filled with scores of civilians who were not affiliated with or even agreed with the Nazi Party, and indeed belonged to other opposition parties. So by firebombing Dresden and Hamburg, one can safely assume that many of them were simply German civilians, rather than Nazi ones. We can look to these bombing campaigns of civilian areas and conclude that they did little, if anything, to end the war. Indeed, the U.S. War Department's official study of aerial bombing after the war concluded that not cities, but industrial targets were the major success of the Allied air campaign. The importance of careful selection of targets for air attack is emphasized by the German experience. The Germans were far more concerned over attacks on one or more of their basic industries and services, their oil, chemical, or steel industries, or their power or transportation network, than they were over attacks on their armament industry or the city areas. The official British report of the air campaign shared similar, if not more candid language. The British area offensive, area bombing as in the bombing of cities, had failed both to break German morale and to stem the rise in arms production. Insofar as the offensive against German towns was designed to break the morale of the German civilian population, it clearly failed. Far from lowering essential war production, it also failed to stem a remarkable increase in the output of armaments. Not only did these needlessly savage bombings do practically nothing to end the war, we can conclude that a great many of the people killed did absolutely nothing wrong. People don't say that much, but when this is the principal justification for mechanized mass slaughter, and one accepts for argument's sake that Saddam is Hitler or Hamas are the Nazis, it should trouble you to know that Germany was not a monolith. And that brings me to the broader point, that more often than not, a vast population of millions of people are hardly ever a robotic hive mind entranced by a cult of personality. And in Gaza, that couldn't be further from the truth. As of the release of this video, there's an ongoing hostage situation in Gaza. I saw this headline from Ground News. Hamas says it will delay next hostage releases over Gaza aid dispute. In very subtle ways, headlines can be tweaked to convey certain narratives.
God damn, dude. What a fucking subtle / not so subtle ad break coming right at the top of the hour too, by the way, which is crazy. Bombing of Dresden might not have been effective in dismantling the Nazi regime. However, if you want to dismantle the top of the hour ad break, all you need to do is subscribe. Here's the 3-minute ad break now.
Ground News actually provides all the articles in one place and shows additional context on where this news is coming from so we can compare coverage and see the full story. This story has been picked up all over the world. In fact, there's been over 70 articles published, and the coverage is skewed to the right. More than half of these articles are coming from mixed factuality sources, telling me there's likely to be some subjective and sensationalized coverage. Looking closer at the headlines, we can see many of these sources emphasizing the delay in releasing the hostages. Some sources cite the logistical challenges leading to a delay, claiming a dispute over allowing aid trucks into Gaza as part of the agreement. I've been following their timeline on the Israel-Palestine conflict to see how media coverage differs depending on political affiliation. I think what Ground News is doing is really important, and I encourage you to check it out. Go to ground.news/GDF, subscribe through my link for less than $1 a month, or take advantage of their biggest discount of the year, 40% off their Vantage plan for unlimited access, which is what I have. Get access to data-driven information and support my channel in the meantime.
Ethical reacts. That's why we're watching the ad.
We're all well aware now that in 2006, parliamentary elections were held in Gaza. Hamas was voted into power. To outsiders, it is easy to assume that this was an endorsement by the populace of Hamas's founding charter, their anti-Semitism, their fanatical ideology and politics. Hamas had, after all, up to this point, engaged in violent terrorist attacks on Israelis, including the use of suicide bombings on non-military targets. In reality, however, the election results are better framed as a rebuke of the previous authority, Fatah.
Yep.
In fact, opinion on the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority in Gaza and the West Bank both dropped dramatically year after year leading up to 2006.
I wonder why that could have happened. Why could such a thing have happened? Oh, how?
According to studies by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, in 2001, 74% of Palestinians believed that the Palestinian Authority was corrupt. By 2003, it was 81%. By the end of 2005, that number was 86%, the better part of the entire population. They were right. By 2006, 60% of the Palestinian Authority's budget was devoted to salaries.
Hold up. Before we get to this, I need you to understand something, okay? In 1996, general elections, here, this is your favorite fucking thing. I'm going to show you some Wikipedia. In 1996, general elections were held for the first time in the Palestinian territories on the 20th of January, 1996, to elect the president of the Palestinian National Authority and members of the Palestinian Legislative Council, the legislative arm of the Palestinian National Authority. They took place in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. Following the elections, a government was formed, headed by the president of the Palestinian National Authority, Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat got 89.82% of the vote. 89.82% of the vote. There has never to this day been such a broad governing majority amongst the Palestinian population that polled as high. There were no real strong conventional political parties in place before the election. The results were dominated by Fatah, the strongest movement within the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was headed by Yasser Arafat. The Islamist Hamas, Fatah's main rival, refused to participate in the election because they felt doing so would lend legitimacy to the PNA. At the time, there were polls conducted on their popularity, at least in 1988, in the beginning of their charter, and even all the way until 1996, their popularity was marginal. like around 3%. Okay? Just remember this. At this point, Palestinians already were aware. Palestinians were already aware. Oh, here is the Hamas's 1996 election in the legislative body. Oh, here it is. 3% popularity for Ahmed Yassin. And then 12% for the legislative body. Okay? They underscored how Islamist they were, but also simultaneously they were still maintaining the position that they are interested in. They're interested in militantly opposing, violently opposing the Israeli occupation, as opposed to Arafat, who was seen as the figure that was willing to negotiate with the Israeli government. Palestinians at the time understood that the negotiations process had not started off on great on a great footing, on even ground, and yet still. Why is Hasan Abi reading Wiki? Doesn't he know all this? Why is he doing Wiki research? Why is Hasan doing research? Wiki researchers over here? Dude, please dial it back a little bit. Okay? I have quite literally brought up these numbers 1,000 times over the past fucking 2 months. You understand that, right? There's a difference between me saying Yasser Arafat won with 89% majority governing mandate 2 months ago, and then me pulling it up once again here right now. Just because you're seeing it for the fucking first time doesn't mean, oh my God, you recognize that you're a fucking buffoon because you're not in here all the time. And as soon as you are found to be wrong, you go, oh, then why open up the wiki? There you go, man. I'm showing the reference. You want me to show a reference? I'm showing you the reference. You're still complaining. At a certain point, you got to realize, like, you're not interested in the truth at all. Okay? What the fuck? There's a difference between making my position known ahead of time and then reading Wikipedia pages for fucking days on end to try and post hoc rationalize my original decision, only to like slightly deviate away from that and get to the point that like liberal Zionists were at in like 1998. You know what I mean? Read a little bit more Wikipedia pages. Maybe we'll get to fucking 2023 where we're at now. You regularly cite scholars on the matter, and this guy calls you a wiki researcher. So disingenuous. I know. You're doing backflips and blowing bubbles on this motherfucker Yasser. Bro basically gave up the entire West Bank to Israel, not intentionally, but he was dumb to believe that he could trust Zionists. First of all, I'm not blowing bubbles. I've talked about Yasser Arafat's fall from grace time and time again as well. The reason why I'm mentioning this right now is that how he was perceived by the broader Palestinian majority at the time is demonstrably popular. Look at this. This to me indicates that Palestinians have always held on to the idea, no matter how fucking false it was, that yes, you can negotiate and move forwards with a peaceful process to create a nation state. And after 3 decades of Israel showing them that, no, we are not interested in a fucking two-state process at all, the alternative, Hamas, has only gotten the plurality vote, barely reaching majority popularity. Do you understand why that's important? That's important to understand. It's important to understand because many people claim falsely that the Palestinians are a violent people, that they're, you know, virulent anti-Semites, and that's why they love Hamas, who's also violent and anti-Semitic, and they don't have any rational, there's no rational actors here. Okay? They're the worst terrorists. Hamas has never reached that same level of popularity ever. Okay? Never. Militancy has time and time again changed. Like the approval for militant retaliation has changed amongst the Palestinian population. But as conditions worsen, once again, you see the people voting for the leadership that they vote for and the reasons why they vote for them. They don't vote for fucking Hamas in 2006 because they fucking think Hamas is great and they want Islamist fundamentalists or they vote for Hamas because like they are like, oh, they're anti-Semitic. I heard in their 1988 charter, okay, they were really anti-Semitic. That's why I vote for Hamas, because Hamas is evil, is not how they operate. Okay? The idea that they all voted for Hamas is also silly when you look at a population where more than 50% could not have even voted for Hamas or anyone in 2006 because they were not around or they weren't even adults. Majority population is minors in Gaza. It's such a stupid fucking argument.
The Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research duly initiated an exit poll following the election, where they observed that crumpling peace process and a greater public complaint of corruption and chaos gave Hamas a limited advantage over Fatah, but fragmentation within Fatah turned that advantage into an overwhelming victory. This poll is very informative, listing in detail the reasons why Hamas won. The results of the exit poll clearly show that Hamas's victory in the legislative elections was due to 3 factors. Number 1, the peace process is no longer at the top of people's priorities. Findings show that only a small minority of voters considered the peace process to be a top Palestinian priority.
It's important to frame this or contextualize this within the devastating impact that the peace process brought upon the Palestinian population. Okay? 1977, there is 8,000 to 10,000 settlers living in the West Bank. By 2006, we've reached 180,000. Some of the numbers I might be a little wrong on. I mean, it's just like give or take. And that is without including East Jerusalem. Okay? All that happened under the auspices of peaceful negotiation and a possible two-state solution. That's crazy. Of course, you're going to look at that and go, like, what the fuck are we doing with the peace process?
Voters saw the peace process deadlocked with little or no chance of revitalization. This outcome should not, however, be interpreted as indicating a decline in the level of support for Israeli-Palestinian peace. Indeed, exit poll results clearly indicate that a clear majority of Fatah supporters, as well as the combined voters of all other nationalist lists, as well as 1/3 of Hamas voters, support the basic elements of the peace process, such as the two-state solution. Number 2, findings depict a widespread voter disillusionment with PA governance, particularly in areas of fighting corruption and enforcing law and order. These 2 issues were the top priorities of the public. Moreover, voters have lost confidence in the ability of Fatah to lead state building in these 2 areas. The success of Hamas in elevating the status of corruption and lawlessness to top priorities constituted a magnificent achievement, ensuring its victory in the elections. And number 3, Hamas's success would have remained relatively small had it not been for Fatah's widespread fragmentation in the electoral districts. Yeah. In fact, Hamas did not succeed in winning the support of the majority of the voters. Yeah. To the contrary, the majority vote went to Fatah and other nationalist secularist groups, which together won 56% of the popular vote versus Hamas's 44%.
And a big chunk of that 44 versus 56 is like Hamas's governing plurality over Fatah was 3%. Okay? Despite the fact that Fatah itself was seen as like a corrupt institution at this point that was operating at the behest of the Israeli government, okay? At this point, they have helped Israel and the Israeli occupying force capture leaders from different political factions, okay? of course, at that point, Palestinians are like, what the fuck are we doing here? You guys are just an oppressive badge by a different name. You're just speaking Arabic, but you're doing the bidding of the Israeli government. And even then, they had no fucking options, and they still voted for Fatah by 41%. Hamas getting 44%, only getting a plurality.
Another enlightening resource is an article by Angela Stevens for worldpublicopinion.org, a site managed by the Program for Public Consultation of the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. Stevens writes, new polling following the election indicates Palestinians, or 63%, believe Hamas should change its policy of rejecting Israel's right to exist. Most also support a two-state solution.
Which is pretty ironic because, like, they did.
Post-election polls indicate that Hamas's victory is due largely to Palestinians' desire to end corruption in government rather than support for the organization's political platform. Even among those who voted for Hamas, only 37% support Hamas's position that Israel does not have the right to exist. Fighting corruption was cited as the most important priority for the new government by 30% of respondents.
Wow, they did change that policy. Is the video old? No, he's just going through the time frame. And he hasn't gotten a 2017, which he might not ever.
More than any other priority. The extent of the
point of this video is to show that Palestinians voted for Hamas is not a good fucking reason to advocate for their genocide. It's to show you that even Palestinians who voted for Hamas had differences in opinion on civil governance and also even in the militancy. It's also many of these people didn't vote for Hamas anyway. Many people that are alive right now didn't have the fucking capacity to vote for Hamas because they weren't alive back then. They're children.
The problem was highlighted earlier this month when the Palestinian Authority Attorney General announced that some $700 million had been stolen from the authority's coffers. Two-thirds, 65%, said they believe corruption will decrease under a Hamas-led government. One interesting and perhaps overlooked detail was voter regret. Only 41% said that they would vote for Hamas if the election were held again, down from the 45% who voted for Hamas. This suggests that rather than consolidating their position with the Palestinian electorate, some may now be feeling uneasy about the outcome, suggesting that some may have voted for Hamas as a kind of protest vote rather than out of a desire or expectation that Hamas would win. Indeed, 74% of those polled did not expect Hamas's overwhelming victory. Stevens cites a poll from the Jerusalem Media and Communications Center, which provides the most compelling data with regard to the reasons why Palestinians voted for Hamas. When asked why they chose Hamas, the highest ratio, 43%, of Palestinians who voted for Hamas said they did so with the hope of ending corruption.
Yeah. They did lesser evil voting, dude. No, literally. They were like, so the Fatah is Hillary? Not even. No, you can't compare this to like the destruction and death machine that America is. Because from their perspective, Fatah is, one, collaborating with Israel and also collaborating with America. Okay? At this point, George W. Bush wants this election to be held because George W. Bush wants Fatah to win. From the perspective of the Palestinian population, they see that. They recognize it. They think like, what the fuck? These guys are literally both backed by the CIA and backed by Israel too. And they're capturing militants of every other fucking faction for the Israeli state. And they're taking all of our fucking foreign aid that's supposed to be coming to us and pocketing it. Years and years of corruption allowed by the Israeli government.
Only 18% voted for Hamas for religious reasons, and only 11% voted for Hamas because of its political agenda. It's very eerie that literally on...
Right about Fatah, but technically didn't Israel also work with Hamas by propping up as an asset? First of all, when Israel propped up Hamas, they were not even Hamas. They were mostly just a Islamist charity, which many examples exist in the Middle East. And secondly, they propped up Hamas, but their collaboration with Fatah was very different than their propping of Hamas. Benjamin Netanyahu also sent bags of cash to Hamas by way of Doha. However, that legitimacy, like Israel chose to give legitimacy to Hamas and chose to give them a just cause by maintaining the occupation, maintaining the apartheid structure. Israel also undermined the alternative to Hamas, which was very popular in its inception. Because time and time again, if you look at any kind of Israeli policy in the maintenance of the apartheid regime, you come to this conclusion. If you read anything about it, you read anything at all, if you know even a little bit about the peace process, about the negotiations, about how Israel has maintained its violent occupation, you recognize that it is one of arrogance. It's one that is incredibly fucking violent and has increasingly become more and more violent over the course of its 75-year process, and it only is Western facing. They never cared to actually deal with the Palestinians. The only guy that at the very least saw it as a security concern and like legitimately saw that the Palestinians had to get a fucking Palestinians had to get a nation state was a guy who got fucking assassinated and was slated to lose the election even if he didn't get fucking assassinated. Yitzhak Rabin was going to lose the Benjamin Netanyahu anyway. Okay? And he wasn't exactly fond of Palestinians at all. He just understood that there was like a grave security concern if you didn't give Palestinians anything, that there was no way to continue the occupation in the way that Israel wanted to. There is no election or there is no political party that is not in some way tarnished, either directly controlled or funded or even assassinated by Israel. If you're talking about Palestinians, like, of course, the occupation is going to have its grip on everything that goes on in its own occupation. With some exceptions, but those exceptions oftentimes come from the United States of America. The only other party with genuine involvement in the matter. And I guess Iran too. If you look at the peace process and look at it seriously, you will understand how Hamas was able to gain any kind of prominence whatsoever.
On the eve of the October 7th attacks, surveys were being conducted on public opinion in the Palestinian territories. In fact, between September 28th and October 6th, interviews were carried out in Gaza in a study compiled by Arab Barometer in collaboration with Foreign Affairs magazine, the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, with funding from the National Endowment for Democracy. Foreign Affairs characterized the project as the longest-running and most comprehensive public opinion project in the region. Arab Barometer has run 8 waves of surveys covering 16 countries in the Middle East and North Africa since 2006. The results of the latest survey were first published exclusively by Foreign Affairs. The argument that the entire population of Gaza can be held responsible for Hamas's actions is quickly discredited when one looks at the facts. Rather than supporting Hamas, the vast majority of Gazans have been frustrated with the armed group's ineffective governance as they endure extreme economic hardships. Most Gazans do not align themselves with Hamas's ideology either. Unlike Hamas, whose goal is to destroy the Israeli state, the majority of survey respondents favored a two-state solution with an independent Palestine and Israel existing side by side. The survey's findings reveal that Gazans had very little confidence in their Hamas-led government. Asked to identify the amount of trust they had in the Hamas authorities, a plurality of respondents said they had no trust at all. Not a lot of trust was the second most common response at 23%.
This is the poll I was talking about, where this Arab Barometer poll also showed that like Hamas is more popular in the West Bank than they are in Gaza, for understandable reasons, as a matter of fact, because Hamas's militant escalations are oftentimes retaliatory whenever Gaza, or not whenever Gaza is struck, but whenever the West Bank is struck, whenever Palestinians in the West Bank are being undermined or being killed by the Israeli occupying force, after threatening to do retaliatory missile strikes, they end up doing it. I mean, even the October 7th acts were, they were called the Al-Aqsa Flood for a reason, right? So for that reason, the West Bank Palestinians slowly but surely start seeing that the Hamas is the only game in town. It's the only militant faction that is willing to retaliate towards the occupying force with some semblance of force, right? But they also are not under Hamas's civil governance, right? Two things, and Elon is completely correct. One, when Hamas responds to the events in the West Bank, is the Gaza Palestinian population that suffers the war, not the West Bank Palestinians to the same degree, even though they do suffer as well, because Israel also is constantly squeezing them, okay? But not to the same degree. That's number one. Number two, Hamas is not have any sort of civil governance in the West Bank, so they don't actually see the daily maintenance and develop the distrust that comes from existing under Hamas's civil governance. Not to say that like Hamas's civil governance and Hamas's militant factions are completely aligned on everything. Of course not. But ultimately they don't get the worst aspects of being under Hamas leadership, while only seeing Hamas as a militant faction that are going to resist against the occupation in violent ways.
Only 29% of Gazans expressed either a great deal or quite a lot of trust in their government. Tragically, Gazans' desperate hopes for a reduction in corruption has been met with extraordinary disappointment, as 72% said there was a large or medium amount of corruption. Given the low opinion most Gazans hold for their government, it was unsurprising that their disapproval extends to Hamas as a political party. Just 27% of respondents selected Hamas as their preferred party, slightly less than the proportion who favored Fatah, the party that is led by Abbas and that governs the West Bank. Leadership style is not the only thing that Gazans find objectionable about Hamas. By and large, Gazans do not share Hamas's goal of eliminating the State of Israel. Overall, 73% of Gazans favored a peaceful settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. On the eve of Hamas's October 7th attack, just 20% of Gazans favored a military solution that could result in the destruction of the State of Israel. In conclusion, as seen in the single most important takeaway from Hamas won 44.5% of the Palestinian vote in parliamentary elections in 2006. But support for the group plummeted after a military conflict between Hamas and Fatah in June 2007 ended in Hamas's takeover of Gaza. In a poll conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research in December 2007, just 24% of Gazans expressed favorable attitudes toward Hamas. Over the next
And yet, once again, just like with the Saddam, just like with Gaddafi, the way to fucking rid a deeply unpopular administration is not by fucking bombing that population relentlessly, because the only thing you'll do in that circumstance is solidify the support that they experience. This is unfortunately the classic American foreign policy conundrum. Of course, if you don't think about Palestinians as human beings, or Arabs as human beings, or Muslims in general as human beings that are not a monolith, and you don't really think about that at all, like about what the impact of like death and devastation will do to the politics on the ground, yeah, you can get away with just being thousands of miles away from the problem and just blowing shit up and just being like, oh, we tried to destabilize, we try to like effectively execute the leadership and thought that we would be bringing democracy that way, when that has never happened. Has never happened.
Few years, as Israel tightened its blockade of Gaza and ordinary Gazans felt the effects, approval of Hamas increased, reaching about 40% in 2010. Israel partially eased the blockade the same year, and Hamas's support in Gaza leveled off before declining to 35% in 2014. In periods when Israel cracks down on Gaza, Hamas's hardline ideology seems to hold greater appeal for Gazans. Thus, rather than moving the Israelis and Palestinians toward a peaceful solution, Israeli policies that inflict pain on Gaza in the name of rooting out Hamas are likely to perpetuate the cycle of violence. As we can clearly see, support for Hamas governance initially reached a euphoric peak with the 2006 election, motivated by Fatah corruption and promises for social reforms. Hamas staged a compelling campaign based on an agenda of economic transparency and welfare programs for the poor. This support, which was hopeful and wary from the start, waned considerably over time until it was somewhat abysmal. The people of Gaza are very clearly and importantly not Hamas. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching.
The people of Gaza are very clearly not Hamas. However, Hamas's civil governance is, trying to make the most of the shitty circumstances that they have to deal with. So to discredit the entirety of the Gaza Strip by saying, well, they voted for it is ridiculous. Obviously, they didn't, or the ones that did vote for it voted under different reasons. However, this also doesn't personally mean that we have to go in and eviscerate. We have to go in and eviscerate the leadership of Hamas. If you want to fucking do that, the leadership is not even in fucking Gaza. Okay? And that has never actually fucking worked anyway. It's never worked. And the only way that you would think that it works is if you personally don't give a shit. You don't give a shit about what happens in the Gaza Strip. You're thousands of miles away, and it doesn't impact you in any capacity. Okay? Gabor Mate on Piers. Nice.
And if you found this video
worked in World War II. First of all, it didn't work in World War II. Because in West Germany, we still ended up fucking aligning with the Nazis. We did not denazify West Germany. Okay? So what do you mean it fucking worked? If anything, we renazified it. Also, World War II is a ridiculous comparison to make in this instance because Hamas, or the Palestinian population, is not a militarized machine of death and destruction that is taking over other countries in the fucking region with its insane military power. Okay? This is why you can't talk about Hamas under similar terms, because Hamas is nothing. It's just a group of individuals who are saying we are going to violently resist against the Israeli occupation. Okay? If it's not Hamas, it's Hamas too. If it's not Hamas, it's a different group. It doesn't matter. No matter what happens, this feels like frat boy history, not gonna lie. You think it's frat boy history to say that people are going to want to violently resist against what? Did you just copy paste this? What the fuck? He's just copy pasting, going through all the talking points personally. And then we'll say, well, you can't address the talking points, sir. I guess your own. He had it ready. Anyway, yeah, saying that this is frat boy history is silly, okay? The IRA, the ANC, the FLN, so many different groups have resisted against violent occupation and imperialism, colonial powers, and an apartheid regime, and It's not frat boy history to know about that. It's not frat boy history to say that to be knowledgeable over the way that people have defended against colonial exploitation and violence. Understand this, because constantly pointing at the fucking the 1988 charter completely diminishes the understandable reasons as to why Palestinians want to resist a apartheid regime. Okay? It's ridiculous. What do you mean? Like, what would you do in that circumstance? It's a good question someone needs to ask all these people. It's like, what would you do? What do you do?